Pastor Brett said, welcome. We're so glad that you're here with us this morning. I do want to make a correction. You probably saw that Truth Project slide as he talked about it. It said on there 7, but he said 6:30. It does start at 6:30. So I just want you to know, if you want to be a part of the Truth Project, come tomorrow. It's here in this building, 6:30. It's an amazing study, and we'd love for you to be a part of that. Again, as Pastor Brett said, welcome. We're so glad that you're here. He launched a brand new series last weekend called Won't You Be My Neighbor? To be honest, when I came up, I thought I probably should take my shoes off, put my house shoes or something on, but yeah, I didn't know if that was appropriate or not, so I didn't bring the house shoes today. But hey, we're so excited about this series and this idea of won't you be my neighbor? I know when Pastor Brett launched into this last week, we looked at a passage that I think is familiar. If it's not familiar, the concepts within the passage I think are familiar to most people. And it was actually a discussion that Jesus was having with what was called a Pharisee, which is a leader in the law, understands the law that was of that time through the Old Testament. And he asked Jesus this question, a question that I think a lot of people want to know the answer to. And it's the question, how do I inherit eternal life? How do I guarantee that I can live forever and that what I'm doing will go on, that I don't have to stop? How do I avoid death? How do I get that? And Jesus, in Jesus' fashion, does what he always does, and he kind of flips it, and he asked him a question. And in that question, he asked him, what does the law say? What does it say? And he answered it very quickly, and he said, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and the others like it, to love your neighbor as yourself. But when I think about this idea of loving my neighbor, for some, I think just initially they're like, whoa, hold on, back up the truck. You want me to do what? Love my neighbor? I've already got a close set of friends. We do life together. We enjoy each other's company. We encourage each other. We cry together. We celebrate together. We just do all these things. Why do I need more friends? And for some of you, you would say, you know what? My friend pool is so full, I can't add anybody else. I mean, have you seen how many people are following me on Facebook? I got lots of friends. I mean, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, you just look. I mean, why do I need to get to know my neighbors? Maybe you would say, you know what? I'm an introvert. When it comes to getting to know new people, it's not as easy for me as it is maybe for you. And so just diving in and getting to know them and finding out their name and finding out a little bit about them and just kind of talking and maybe actually doing life together, that may be easy for you, but man, that's nowhere on my radar. And so last week, one of the things that we did and we talked about is I'm for my four. And if you were here with us last week, this card was sitting on your seat. I mean, you couldn't miss it. And the challenge for you and the same challenge for me was that we would actually get to know the names of our neighbors, that we would get to know them and that we would begin to pray for them and then just see where it goes. And I know if you're like me, when you think of your neighbors, you may know their names. I know some of my names are the names of my neighbors. I don't know all of them. My neighbors are kind of classified in, hey, that's the guy across the street that works on the goat carts. That's the family that has way more kids than I do. That neighbor, him and his family, they love to go camping every weekend. He's always working, on his fifth wheel and just where they're going to go next. My next door neighbor, he's created a backyard oasis. It's, I drive into the neighborhood down the street. Man, the garage is already open. I'm pulling in the garage. It's shutting. I don't see anybody else. They don't know me. I don't know them. But we know who our neighbors are in some form, some fashion, whether we've given them their own name or not. But that you and I would just simply begin to get to know them, and more importantly, that we would begin to pray for them. Because I've heard that everything starts with prayer. And so just imagine for a moment, what if I just commit to do that? I mean, I think things would begin to change, and the way that I interact with my neighbors would probably begin to change as well. And just simply begin to pray. I mean, this whole idea of, won't you be my neighbor? And if you have a Bible this morning, I want to encourage you to turn to Luke chapter 14 because we're going to look at another conversation that Jesus is having with a Pharisee. Another guy, just like we saw in Luke chapter 10. And the conversation that he begins to have is a unique one because it begins to bring to light, I think, that at times has been lost in our culture, and it's this idea of hospitality. And I know when I throw that out, for some of us initially we would say, well, hold on, hospitality, I've got that. I've got it down. I mean, we have people over at our house all the time. I mean, my family comes over. We do things together. My friends come over. We hang out. We barbecue. We play games together. We watch movies together. I'm doing life. And this is where Jesus begins to really bring into perspective something that I think goes against our culture. Because when we think about hospitality and the way that he begins to frame it for us are two totally different things. So Luke chapter 14, starting in verse 7. When he noticed how the guests picked the place of honor at the table, he told them this parable. So I want you to imagine for just a moment. The scene is a banquet. Everybody's been invited. Everybody that's coming is trying their best to get as close as they can to whoever is the person of honor at that banquet. At this banquet, it happens to be the person that's throwing the banquet. Everybody wants to sit close. We understand this in our culture. The way we see it is typically in weddings. You've been to those weddings where you come in and the seat is assigned. The cards are on the table. You know exactly where you're going to sit. Those that are closest to the bride and groom sit the closest to the bride and groom. Moms, dads, grandparents, immediate family, they're all sitting close. Those who are in the wedding party, they're sitting close to the bride and groom. That's the picture. Those that are invited to the wedding, but aren't as close to the bride and groom, they tend to sit farther away. Maybe you've been the couple that's shown up and you don't really know anybody other than the bride and groom. And I'm sure the bride and grooms thought to themselves, all right, who can I put them with that they won't fight? Or maybe I can set them with, because these people are social, they'll make them feel welcomed and warm and like they're supposed to be a part of this. We've all been there. Don't act like I'm the only one. We've been to that. That's the scene. Everybody's trying to do everything they can to get as close to the person of honor. And this is what Jesus says in verse 8, when someone invites you to a wedding feast, do not take the place of honor. For a person more distinguished than you may have been invited. If so, the host who invited both of you will come to you and say, give this person your seat. Then humiliated, you will have to take the least important place. But when you're invited, take the lowest place, so that when the host comes to you, he will say to you, friend, move up to a better place. Then you will be honored in the presence of all the other guests. For all those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. See, we look at this core thing that Jesus is talking about in this passage. And really what he's talking about is this. How do you see people? Honestly, how do you see people? Do you see people as, well, this person or that person is going to help me get here because this is where I want to be? Do you see them as just someone that is getting you to that place of, hey, I hope someday, I dream someday, and it's going to take this to get there? Or do you see people the same way that God sees people? Because let's be honest, we all like to be served. I don't think there's one of us in here that say, you know what, I hate it when people are nice to me. Why are they so nice to me? Really, come on. Couldn't they be just a little meaner to me? Why don't they be so nice? None of us. We love to be served. We go to restaurants to be served. We go to other places to be served for people to wait on us. But how do you see them? Really, do you just see them as, well, they're getting me what I want or what I think that I need or have to have or what I deserve? Or do you see them as a soul? Do you see them as God's creation? That he created them the same way that he created you in his image. And that just as you have a purpose, that they have a purpose. But we all like to be served. How do you see people? I mean, take it a little farther. How do you see your neighbors? How do you see the grocery clerk at the store? How do you see the cashier at the gas station or at the fast food restaurant? How do you see your teacher's kid or your kid's teacher? Yeah. Teacher's kid. My kids are a teacher's kid. How do you see your kid's teacher? Really, how do you see them? Do you see them the same way that God does? Because there's this unique thing about hospitality. Hospitality, it starts with humility. It starts with you and I humbling ourselves the same way that Jesus did. Jesus said, I came to serve, not to be served. I came to serve. But we like to be served. I mean, I like to feel special. I like it when people go out of their way to show me attention. I like it. I mean, it's why I go to some of the places that I go to. It's why I do some of the things that I do. It's even maybe why I hang out with some of the people that I hang out with. I mean, again, I'm just being honest. We like it. But hospitality, it begins with humility. You and I humbling ourselves. And humility, it's fundamental to grace. Jesus humbled himself, and he went to the cross for you and for me out of his great love for us. That he took what we ultimately deserved. We ultimately deserve that death on the cross. Because let's be honest, none of us here are perfect. But yet, out of his perfection, he took a place that he didn't have to take. And so he humbled himself to serve us by going to the cross and taking your sins and mine because of that love that he has for us. How do I know that? Because Paul wrote in Philippians chapter 2, verses 1 through 5. It says, therefore, if you have any encouragement from being united with Christ, so those who are followers of Jesus, if any comfort from his love, if any common sharing in the Spirit, if any tenderness and compassion, then make my joy complete by being like-minded, having the same love, being one in spirit and of one mind. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interest of others. In your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus. That you and I, because Jesus set this great example of humility, that it would benefit us to imitate him. And that's exactly what Paul's saying, is that we can begin to experience the same thing that Jesus experienced, the same benefit, if we would just simply humble ourselves and begin to think of others before us. I mean, that was the question, right? From last week. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And the next is just like it, to love your neighbor as yourself. To love your neighbor as yourself. And I know you take something like this. Well, I go to weddings, and there's not necessarily always a placard that says, hey, this is where you're supposed to sit, and you sit wherever you want. I mean, there are a couple of reserved tables for the wedding party and the family, but pretty much everybody else can sit anywhere else they want, right? So how does this relate to you and to me? Because it does relate to us culturally today, just as it did to them. We've just spun it from a different perspective, and the way we've spun it is materialistic. I mean, think about it. Maybe it's with the things that we wear, the things that we drive, or the places that we live in, or the jobs that we have. Because it's the same thing. They were wanting a position of honor of, hey, look at me. Look at who I am. I get to sit next to the host of the party. Or, look at me. Look what I drive. Now, don't misunderstand me. I don't want you to take this and run with it a different direction. It doesn't mean that God doesn't want us to be blessed and to have nice things. I'm not saying that. So I don't want you to misunderstand that. But what I want you to hear is when the things that we have, when they become the priority over Jesus, then we're no different than what he's talking about this banquet. Because we're looking for status, we're looking for position, we're looking for, hey, this is how you identify me, this is how you know me. I mean, some of us, our natural reaction is when we introduce ourselves to somebody new, we usually introduce them based off of something that identifies who we are. Hi, I'm Corey, I'm so-and-so. Now, for me, typically I don't walk up and say, hi, I'm Corey, I'm a pastor. I mean, when I do that, most people are like, oh, all right, yeah, pastor. But we do it, whether we want to or not. And so we have this idea that everybody exists to make much of me, to serve me, to provide for me, to honor me, to exalt me. But then what we really miss is who people really are, who God says that they are. I mean, think about it. If he says that I am his son, that I am loved, that I am cherished, that I am valuable, he says the same thing about everyone else. Because we were all created in his image, no matter who you are, no matter where you've been, no matter what you've done or what's been done to you, you were created in the image of God as his sons, as his daughters. And to begin to experience that kind of love. Sometimes we think to ourselves, no one else but me can have a bad day. No one else but me can struggle. No one else but me can understand what I'm going through. No one else, ultimately, we're saying, has a soul but me. Humility, I think it reminds us that God has given us all good things for no good reason. He's given us. If he's the creator of everything, he has provided everything for us. But we didn't deserve it. We don't deserve it. And what's so interesting is when you really begin to think about it, we do live within this culture where we think that, hey, I am hospitable. I am doing all these things to live life with others and to engage others. But in reality, for so many, it's on that screen. And we live our life in relation based on what we see and scroll and what we like and comment to. And then we begin to classify those as our deep, meaningful relationships. And then we wonder, why do I feel so alone? I mean, I can't be the only one, right? I can't be the only one that feels alone. There was a book written called Bowling Alone. And it was actually a Harvard professor. And he begins to chronicle sociologically and statistically the decline in hospitality in the last few decades. And here's some of the numbers that he has brought to light in this book. The number of people playing cards together is down 25%. I mean, maybe you're like me. I remember as a kid, I remember people coming over to my house and my parents playing cards and games with other friends and enjoying each other's company and fellowship. I mean, I remember that. I remember the neighbors coming over and hanging out and doing fun stuff. I mean, come on, you got to remember it. I remember because it was like, get out, we're playing, leave, you're not old enough to be in here. Another thing, the number of bars, nightclubs, and taverns where people gather together, it's down 40%. 40%. Full-service restaurants where people walk in, sit down, and they have a meal, they're down 25%. But the number of fast food restaurants are up 100% because so many people eat alone in their cars. I mean, I saw it firsthand. I was in Texas with my family the last few days, and my sister and I are driving down the road, and the guy pulls up next to me, and he's eating pizza all by himself in the car. I'm looking at the time. I'm like, it's 3:30 in the afternoon. I mean, having a social evening with neighbors, it's actually down 33%. Family dinners where you get together around the table, it's down 33%. Having friends over to your home, it's down 45% in the last few decades. I mean, listen to this. The readiness of Americans to make friends is down 33%. I mean, that's mind-boggling to me. As a church, what happens so often is we find ourselves living inside of our own bubble, and we never get outside of it. And sometimes what we do is we end up retreating into those bubbles and beginning to just do life with other people that are just like us, that believe like us, that act like us, that live like us. But when I think about this idea of being salt and light, I mean, Matthew chapter 5, it calls you and I, if you're a follower of Jesus, to be salt and light in this world. Salt and light isn't helpful if everyone you know is salty and bright. It just doesn't. But what's interesting is Jesus begins to go on because he's going to break it down for us what this looks like when it comes to hospitality. And this is where I think it begins to change for us in the way we think of it. So in verse 12, he says this, "Then Jesus said to the host, when you give a luncheon or a dinner, do not invite your friends, your brothers or your sisters or your relatives or your rich neighbors. If you do, they may invite you back, so you will be repaid. But," check it out right here. If you want to highlight, underline, whatever, right here. But, verse 13, "But when you give a banquet, when you throw a party, when you have a get-together, when you hang out with people, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed. Although they cannot repay you, you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous." Here, hospitality. I think a lot of times when it comes to it, we misunderstand it. Hospitality isn't just hanging out with Christians. That's fellowship. And we should do that. And I'm not saying don't do that. That's fellowship. But hospitality, the word hospitality in the Bible, it literally means to welcome the stranger. To welcome the stranger, to enjoy other people that don't know Jesus, to begin to interact with them and to begin to show them who Jesus is. So in addition to hanging out with your friends, to invite the strangers so that you don't just simply hang out with them, so that they become your friends too. To begin to show that kind of hospitality. To begin to love others the same way that you and I desire, long, and hope that others would love us. That they would see us for who we really are. Not for who they think we are. Not allowing them to draw their own conclusion of, well, this is who I think Corey is. I think I've got him pinned. I mean, I think based on the things that I read on social media and the pictures that he posts, I think I know what's important. But the people that are closest to me, that know me, they really know. And to begin to develop those kind of relationships. And some of us, we would say, you know what, Pastor, I have those. I'm developing those. I've jumped in with both feet, and I'm living life that way. Hebrews chapter 13, I love what it says. In verses 1 through 3, it says this. It says, "Keep on loving one another as brothers and sisters. Do not forget to show hospitality to the stranger. For by so doing, some people have shown hospitality to angels without knowing it. Continue to remember those in prison as if you were together with them in prison, and those who were mistreated as you yourselves were suffering." Might I suggest this? That Mountain Ridge will not be transformed by Pastor Brett or me when it comes to our preaching. Hear this again. Our church will not be transformed by our preaching, but I believe our church can be transformed by our hospitality, by the way that we love others the same way that Jesus did. Because we live in a world where people are alone. How do I know this? Because I hear it and I see it all the time. I want to read a letter that a 90-year-old woman wrote. Because when it comes to hospitality, hospitality is expecting nothing in return. I mean, really. It's expecting nothing in return. So this 90-year-old woman from Missouri, she decided she had had enough of being alone. So she wrote her neighbor a letter to ask if she would be her friend, and this is what she wrote. Miss, with a question mark because she didn't know who she was. Would you consider to become my friend? I'm 90 years old. I live alone, and all of my friends have passed away. I'm so lonesome. I'm so scared. Please, I pray for someone. I mean, that's the world that we live in. But yet, because we have determined that my relationships, most of the time, I know people because of what I see on social media versus what I experience with them by doing life. By seeing where they are and hearing their hearts and celebrating and having fun and enjoying life. To begin to show hospitality, knowing that if I do this, I don't need anything from it. So where does this leave you? Where does this leave me? If we know that this is the challenge that Jesus is bringing for us, I want to ask 3 questions that you would begin to ask yourself, and I as well would ask myself, and it's this. Do I look at where I live as a way to serve others? I mean, really, do I look at where I live as a way to serve others? Or is it just, it's a place that I've created for me and my family, and we enjoy each other. We've created this amazing oasis in the backyard where we're just alone and have good time, quality time, and it's just us. Or do I see where I live as a way to serve others, to begin to serve my neighbors, to know that if my neighbors need something, they can have whatever I have? Do I see it that way? Am I looking for ways to leverage where I live for the Great Commission? Am I looking to live the same way that Jesus did, hoping that doors will open and I can tell them about what Jesus has done in my life, how he's changed me? I mean, because again, when we think about this idea of, won't you be my neighbor? Can we be a good neighbor? It isn't about checking boxes. It isn't about putting targets on people's backs. But it's really about doing life with them and getting to know them. I read this amazing book called The Gospel Comes with House Keys. And throughout this book, it had this theme that talked about, what if your home became the place where everyone could run to in time of trouble and time of need? Or even when it's times of, hey, we're having a baby. Hey, my daughter, her boyfriend just proposed to her, or whatever it may be. That your house could be that place where you live out the gospel. 3, do I share everything I have for the benefit of others? Knowing if my neighbors need anything, they can have it. And if they don't return it, I'm not holding a grudge. I can't believe that guy didn't return my rake. It's been 6 weeks. Again, to begin to live in such a way where we show this type of hospitality, not because we're hoping to receive something from it, but that we're hoping to live our life as an open book, to engage people with this life-changing message that Jesus Christ loves them and came for them so that they could have purpose, meaning in life. Will you pray with me?